Okay. Today is Sunday, August 27th, and we're here with Ebby Halliday in her home on Preston Road. And just some quick, basic questions to begin with, like I mentioned, Ebby. When and where were you born?
First of all, I'd like to say that today is Maurice's birthday, and he would have been 99.
99 today.
I was born in Leslie, Arkansas, a little town of some fluctuates between 800 people to 1,500 if the barrel factory is in force. So I was born in Arkansas and left there when I was 7 years old.
7 years old. Okay. And how many siblings do you have?
There were 5 in our family. 3 with my mother's first husband, who died when I was very, very young, and 2 by subsequent marriage.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
My mother originally was a housewife until we moved to she remarried and moved to a wheat farm in Kansas. And farmers' wives do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my father was worked for the old Missouri North Arkansas Railroad. He was an engineer, but he died before I really got to know him.
Oh. Well, growing up in that kind of environment, what did you want to do when you grew up? What were your aspirations as a young girl? What did you see yourself doing when you became an adult?
When we reached the farm, of course we had horses, and my first thought was that I would be a bareback rider in a circus because I had a little pony with broad back and learned to stand on his back while he was at a gentle lope.
Well, fast forwarding a little bit, what brought you from Kansas to Dallas?
By way of, I came to Dallas, first of all, I went to high school in Abilene, Kansas, which was 18 miles from the farm. And the first year, the freshman year, we commuted on, we were picked up by bus on Sunday afternoon and taken to school and came home Friday. The last 3 years were high school. I roomed with the postmaster and his wife and worked evenings and Saturdays and summers in a local department store and learned to sell.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, what year did you come to Dallas?
And if I could back up a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to go too fast.
Immediately after graduation in 1929, which was the year that the banks started closing all over America. Men were jumping out of windows on Wall Street, and the beginning of the terrible depression of the 30s was in full swing. So the store where I'd worked my way through high school weren't hiring anyone permanently. So I took a bus and went to Kansas City and applied at the big Jones store there. The personnel department sent me down to the millinery department, I learned later it was to get rid of me because the store wasn't hiring either. And but the millinery department was a leased department by a national firm headquartered in Chicago, who had leased departments in major cities all over. I was there a few years, and in spite of the fact that ladies' hats weren't a great priority, people were wondering where their next meal was coming from. Having learned to sell and having learned that the customer's always right, and whether they were or not, and I managed to, and they sent me to the basement, incidentally, in Jones' store, at $10 a week. And then later they transferred me to their lease department in Omaha, Nebraska, the Herzberg store, in charge of the hat box on the first floor. I'd gotten out of the basement up to the first floor. And then in 1938, they transferred me to Dallas, Texas, to take charge of the couture department way up on the 6th floor of the old W.A. Green store, which had a back entrance right across from Neiman's. I stepped off that train and thought I'd died and gone to heaven. There was such a vibrancy in the city. The mayor had declared an end to the Depression, and the aura of the Texas Centennial, which had happened just 2 years before, 1936. And big name bands were still playing at the Old Baker and the Adolphus Hotel, and there was an air of the relief that the bad part of the Depression was over. And of course the war hadn't quite started yet, although sabers were being rattled, I'm sure, in Europe, but hadn't hit here yet. So that was 1938. And I stayed with the store until the war was over in 1945, and had saved $1,000. I went to Dr. John McLaurin at the old Medical Arts building to have my tonsils out, and while I was practically under the knife, his nurse was bringing him information on the stock market. So when I got my voice back, I said, Dr. John, I see you're in the stock market, and I've saved $1,000, and I want to be in business for myself, and would like you to suggest where I could place my money to increase it so I could become an entrepreneur. I didn't know how to spell it, but I knew I wanted to be one. So he said, I don't advise women. And I said, why? He said, if they lose, they cry. And I said, well, you try me. So he suggested cotton futures. And I put my money in cotton futures. And of course, cotton was still king in Texas. And it didn't take too long to parlay it up to 12,000.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I turned in my resignation and leased space in an old Victorian house on Fairmont Street, which had been redone and rezoned for office and shops, and put in my own little couture millinery, and took most of my customers with me. And sold. So one day, one of those customers came in and said, my husband, her husband, had just bought the old Walnut Hill golf course a year or so prior to that, and had invested in a new type construction called insulated cement, INSIM, steel reinforced cement. And they were well built, they're still there. but they were not very attractive. And of course, during the war, real estate, nothing had been sold. And she relayed his comment that if I could sell her those crazy hats, maybe I could sell his crazy houses. So I sold my little shop to my designer and headed for Walnut Hills, which is just north of Northwest Highway, off of Marsh Lane.
Right.
And there the houses were sitting there, and I did something about the cement. I covered the walls with wall covering, the floors with carpeting, and made one or two model houses with cottage furniture and all. And the first two sales I made were to two guys who came out with shotguns over their shoulders. They had always shot rabbits and game out there. That was on Saturday, and they didn't go back with any game, but with two contracts in their pockets. And they brought their wives out next day, which was Sunday, to see their dream house. And one of the wives became my very first sales agent.
Oh, wow.
Mary Lou Muther.
Mm.
So within about 9 months, I had sold all 52 houses, because by 1945, the young boys were coming back from the war, getting married, and that was their first home, because nothing much had been built during the war, with the exception of these houses. So then I sold the cornfield across Marsh Lane to George Mixon Sr., who got some builders in to build some proper little brick houses. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, the prices were right on the NSIMs. The 2-bedroom houses were $7,000, wow. And the 3-bedrooms were $9,000. And the brick houses were priced $12,000 for the 2-bedroom and $13,000 for the 3. So that was my second inventory, and two of the builders that Mr. Mixon brought into the deal. One of them was Dave Fox, and the other was Ike Jacobs. And of course, Fox and Jacobs later became one of the premier builders in the country.
Right, right.
And my then Leslie Hill built a shopping center fronting on Northwest Highway. And that was, then we opened a proper little office there, because I'd gone from street to street officing in one of the houses while I was selling.
Oh, wow.
So that was the beginning of Ebby Halliday Realtors in 1945. We're in our 61st year now.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So your first official office was on Northwest Highway?
Yes, the official one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in that shopping center,
mm-hmm.
right across from Bachman and Love Field, you know.
Right.
That's where the old Walnut Hill golf course used to be.
Okay.
And Clint Murkison Sr. was the one who bought the golf course and invested in this new type of construction, I think primarily to give Clint Jr. and John, his two sons, something to do, because they were just out of college.
Right. Well, okay, so that gets started in 45. What were some of the, I guess, kind of spike years or real growth years? Did it just begin to grow rapidly after that?
Yes, it did. And our second office was on Forest Lane because the building was being done, Sparkman Estates, and
That's where we live.
where you
Yeah.
live. And our second office was on Forest Lane
Okay.
in the old Exchange Savings Building.
And what was Dallas like at the time in terms of its borders? Like, was Forest was that way out there? Or?
As a matter of fact, the last street of the Walnut Hill NCM development was in the county. It hadn't gotten to Walnut Hill yet, Walnut Hill Lane.
Oh, okay.
And the interesting thing about the NCM houses, the Murkisons had also gotten interested in Mexico at the time. Kenneth Murkison had his horses down there running in Mexico City during the war, and Clint Sr. had purchased a ranch. And so they named the streets Almazan, Bolivar, Cortez, Durango, Espanola, Gasper, and La Jolla.
Oh, that's funny. Well, okay, moving ahead a little bit from there. In 1958, can you describe and tell me about when you first met Maurice?
Yes, by 1947, I had become active in the board in organized real estate, and had become the national president of Women's Council.
Oh, wow.
And had developed an itinerary of speeches. So the Chamber of Commerce in Beaumont invited me there to speak during National Women's Week in 1958. And Maurice Acers had businesses in Austin, San Antonio, and Beaumont. And he was there on business, and that's where we met. I saw this man walk across the lobby of the old Beaumont Hotel like a racehorse on Tuesday morning, and I thought, I hope I get to meet that man. Well, the chairman of the day saw that we were introduced, and then we also rode in the same limousine back to the airport and got better acquainted, exchanged cards and all. And my life really began when I met Maurice Acers. Mm-hmm. He had a fabulous series of careers up to that time. Mm-hmm. Right out of law school, lawyers weren't in great demand in 1934, so he went down the hall and joined the FBI. So he had 17 years with the FBI, and when he left the FBI, he was personnel director for Mr. Hoover, and had been sent to England to study the police school of England and Scotland Yard, and write a book for the Bureau. And then he had come back to Austin and went into the governor's office as Governor Allen Shivers' assistant. Maurice really ran the downstairs of the State House, and Allen was the front man, and a wonderful, wonderful combination. And Maurice, then after Allen and he left the governor's office, Allen appointed him to the Texas Association of Employment, and he was still serving in that capacity when he came to Beaumont to check on his distributorship down there, and that's where we met.
So he left the FBI in the mid-50s?
About 47.
Oh, late 40s.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then he went into the governor's office. And first of all, he went into business with Allen in the valley to help run Allen's 14 corporations down there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Allen was a lieutenant governor. And then when the governor died, and Allen stepped into the governorship, he said to Maurice, "There's nothing here in the valley our secretaries can't handle. Come with me and help me run the State House."
Oh, wow.
So that's how that happened.
Oh, wow.
So Maurice was, he was 50 by then, and I was 46. We weren't exactly kids, but I tell you, never has there been a more wonderful love affair and marriage and working together for the next years. And he was still, and he was very, very much attached to Austin, as you can imagine. And everybody that's ever lived there kind of likes Austin. And it's changed a lot now. I often wonder what he would think of the traffic and the growth, of Austin. But he was king of the road in Austin. He could have been governor, he could have been congressman, he could have been anything. But and he belonged to the Rotary Club of Austin, 587. So 7 years of courtship. We kept the phone lines busy, and unfortunately we didn't have email then. It was still archaic. But, and his mother was living here. In fact, Maurice was born in Dallas, as you know. And so about the end of the 30 days after we had met, he called one day and said he was coming to Dallas, and would I have dinner with him and his mother. So I said, yay, yay, yay. I don't think Johnny liked me too much at first, because Maurice was an only child, and she was very, very devoted to him.
Oh, yeah.
And but by the time we married and all, she and I were good friends.
Oh, that's great. Well, having spent all the years that he did in the FBI and the things that he did while in the FBI, once he left, was there ever occasion where they would call him back or seek his counsel on things, or did it just cut off after he left? Or
he never ceased to be involved in law enforcement. He had been agent in charge of the FBI in San Antonio when the bomb was dropped on, or when Japan bombed Honolulu, Hawaii. And he had a call from Mr. Hoover to have 50 agents out on the West Coast like yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And Tom Braniff had just moved his Braniff Airline down from Tulsa, and Tom sent a plane at Maurice's request, and Maurice made calls and gathered up the agents. One of them was to be married that evening in New Orleans, and that had to be called off. So he got them in, because it really was an emergency, as you know. And he got 50 agents out on the West Coast the following morning.
Wow.
And then he was had worked with the law enforcement agencies, the Texas Rangers and all during the time that he was agent charge in San Antonio. And he, when he and I married and he moved to Dallas, he revived the crime commission here, was chairman of that. Mm-hmm. And he also organized the sheriffs of about 8 counties and got them working together for the first time. Mm-hmm. So he never quit being a G-man.
Okay, that's what I thought. Well, you had mentioned, and I'm kind of curious about after you met and kind of your early years. You talked about Aunt Johnny. So it was in the beginning. Was it difficult warming up to her? Was she a little bit gruff, or?
Well, she was a fabulous woman with, and as Maurice said, the only woman he ever knew who could drive a span of mules on a straight furrow and yet be the reigning queen at a ball that night. She was that kind of a person. Mm-hmm. And your grandfather was his cousin. Mm-hmm. And they were reared like brothers, loved each other. In fact, Bob Pipes died in Maurice's arms. Mm-hmm. Did you know that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They loved each other. Mm-hmm. And they had some wonderful times together. In an old Ford, they lit out for the Chicago World's Fair.
Oh, wow.
And they had some wonderful experiences. And Bob Pipes was a wonderful man also. Mm-hmm. But then Maurice disposed of his businesses in Beaumont, and he retained business in and retained an office and a secretary there to take care of his business in Austin and to keep his indices up. The time he died, he had indices of 10,000 people.
Oh, wow.
That was before the days of the computer, so there were card files.
Oh my gosh.
And he had met during all of his experiences.
Wow.
And had their names, their spouses, their children, their birthdays, their pets, and of course their businesses and all. Mm. And we still find that indices are very valuable. Mm-hmm.
Well, in your, again, kind of the early days, so to speak, I'd say like the 60s, after you were married in 67?
In 65.
65, sorry. About that period, maybe even going into the 70s while you were here in Dallas.
Yes. Now, when Maurice finally moved here, and we had, our company had acquired this Preston Center office, and we rebuilt this house about the time we were married, and Maurice became chairman of the board of Ebby Halliday Realtors, and I became chairman of his Acres investment, which he maintained and retained. And Maurice was an enormous help in the growth of our company. he just could pick up the phone and call anybody, anywhere, and we had just gotten into relocating headquarter companies to this area, and he knew through Boys Club of America, he served on that board, and he became a member of FIABC, our International Real Estate Federation, an organization that I had been involved in for 10 or 15 years. And FIABC, the board met in Paris the first week of every December. So for 15 or 20 years, we went to Paris every December and did our work there, and flew back to New York in time for his National Boys Club board meeting, where he met CEOs of most of the big Fortune 500 companies.
Oh, wow.
And that was very valuable in building our relocation department here.
Sure.
But he was a wonderful, wonderful asset. And the Congress, FIABC, met in a different country every year. And that was a wonderful experience. And LBJ had appointed the ambassador from Austin to Australia, and then the following year or two, he appointed one to Sweden. So the ambassadors always invited us when we went to the FIABC meetings to spend a weekend in Canberra.
Oh, wow.
And it was a wonderful experience. Maurice had a hobby. He loved the study, the etymology of food, and he collected chefs from all over the world. Every time we would go to a foreign country, we'd check in, and he'd head for the kitchen to meet the chef. And one time at one of our board meetings in Paris, we usually did our work and flew right on back to New York, but he said, now we're staying an extra day, come with me to the train station in Paris. And that was before they had the bullet train between Paris and Lyon.
Right.
It was 4 hours we rode to Lyon to have lunch with Paul Bocuse, who was the Escoffier, the great name as far as chefs go, and chefs are considered in Europe on a par with music or art or anything else.
Wow.
So we dined 4 hours in the Paul Bocuse's country restaurant, and then rode back to Paris 4 hours and flew to New York. But food was one of his hobbies, and photography was another. And during the time that I knew him and before, he often filled the pulpit in the Christian church. He was, his minor in his undergraduate work was religion, and he was a wonderful speaker and a wonderful Christian. And of course, Rotary was his passion. He had 47 years of perfect attendance at the time he died, and he didn't start Rotary until he got out of the FBI. And so that was, with all of his interests and then all of mine, we were kept pretty busy.
Well, again, back to kind of the early times, like say the late 60s or so and into the 70s, Who were your really good friends? Like, who did you all spend a lot of time with? Who did you travel with leisurely?
Well, during the 60s and the 70s and the early part of the 80s, he was still very much involved in Austin. He never gave up his office and had a combination office and residence that overlooking at the West Gate, which overlooked out one window the residence for the governor's residence, and out the other window the State House. He said he could see what the legislature was doing. So a lot of our activities were going back. We even kept up social things in Beaumont, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas for several years because he was into everything. His clubs, and he gave himself a birthday party at the Austin Headliners Club every year for up until he finally stopped when he was about 81. Mm-hmm. And so he loved, and he belonged to the Beaumont Country Club, the St. Anthony Club, and the Argyle Club in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And of course, when he came here, the Dallas Country Club.
Mm-hmm. Well, you had mentioned also the trips that you would take with the international meetings and the trips that you would take for the realtor meetings in the various countries and things.
Yes.
And I know you traveled together everywhere. Were there any particular trips or places that you went that stand out in your mind as some of your favorite trips abroad that you took?
Oh, we, of course, loved London because, we obviously met at London quite often, and also in Paris because it was founded in Paris. The one trip to London that stands out in my memory was when Maurice took me on a sentimental journey to Hendon Hall, which was a little bed and breakfast right out on the outskirts of London, where he stayed in 1938 while he was studied with the law enforcement there. Mm-hmm. And we drove up, and this was in 1966, the year after we were married. And the doorman said, "Good morning, Mr. Acers." He had been the chimneyman in 1938, but remembered Maurice Acers. Once you know that man, you remember him. Sure. But we thought that was so interesting and pleased, of course, Mr. Acers. Mm-hmm. And then we went in, and the manager of the hotel said he was so sorry that he couldn't serve us lunch in the dining room because they had a fire. And in removing the soot from the ceiling of the dining room, they discovered a genuine Tintoretta painting, and they restored it and sold it for enough to refurbish the whole hotel.
Oh, goodness.
That was interesting.
Yeah, that is really neat.
And of course, we visited Scotland Yard, and it was Maurice, I'm told, and he admitted that after this year in England, that he was more British than the British. He had this very commanding voice. Oh, yeah. And he had his trench coat belted around him and his little trilby hat. And he was an Englishman. What a man.
Oh, indeed. Let's see. Well, you had talked about his Rotary membership, and I recall a couple of times where he had to go to some great effort to make those meetings.
Right. As a matter of fact, we married in '65, the same year that he had come in as district governor of Rotary at 587, his Austin club. He hadn't moved his membership here yet. So our first honeymoon was the International Rotary meeting in Chicago, and then all the district governors from all over the world and their spouses went to Lake Placid. The old train was from Chicago to Lake Placid for a 10-day indoctrination of the district governors. So that's where we met the district governors from all the other countries. And so when Maurice's friend Ann and Ed Clark were appointed the ambassador to Australia, Maurice wrote letters of introduction to every district governor throughout Australia and sent to Ed Clark their bio, every district governor. So Ed was just welcomed with open arms and when he got to Australia, and just his invitations to visit the clubs and speak were just numerous right off.
Wow.
But Maurice was that kind of a man.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we made many friends with the district governors, and including Hari Haralila from Hong Kong, whose wife had packed 25 silk gowns for the trip. Of course, silk is easy to plait.
Oh, sure.
And so when we would come through Hong Kong, we would be invited to his 40-bedroom home where all the family, relatives lived. They all lived together. And the powder room was papered with real pearls.
Oh my gosh.
It glued them, to paper and papered the powder room with pearls.
Wow.
Of great price.
I can imagine, gosh.
So we've had some exciting trips. But as you spoke of, he had 47 years of perfect attendance, and you spoke of the fact that there were a few times when it was difficult to make up, and one of those times was when Congress was to be in Madrid, and the communists still had Spain under their thumb and had outlawed Rotary. So Maurice was not to be defeated. We flew to North Africa and slid into Marrakesh in time for an evening meeting. That was a close call.
Oh my gosh, that is wild. Well, again, you've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to revisit it. When did he become really involved in Ebby Halliday Realtor? When did he become involved in the business and become chairman of the board? What year was that?
Shortly after we were married.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And you've already talked about this a little bit, but what were some of the distinct differences? What were some of the things that changed for the business once he arrived?
Well, in the first place, he incorporated us. I was breezing along as sole owner, sole captain of the ship. Probably commingled a few funds even. He got that all fixed. And so, and he contributed an awful lot to our classes. The name of his lecture was "Stay Out of Court," and he was very, very valuable in the training of our new agents, and of course all the old ones just loved him and respected him so much. And then he was very, very helpful when we built our relocation business, and headquarter companies started coming in to Dallas, and we were, and my brother Paul Hansen was head of reload department at that time, and he and his assistant Hank Fulmer brought the first 4 or 5 companies here, and we had the exclusive on all of their people. The first company that we arranged for their 150 families were the Associates of North America that transferred here from South Bend, Indiana, and built the second headquarter building in Las Colinas. So that was, and we did such a good job for them. We had, they would airlift 50 families in each week, and we would have 50 agents out at DFW with the card with the name of the family they were to help. And it was a very efficient situation. And then they recommended us to the second company that we brought in, which was an air conditioning company, and then Celanese, and we were, then later on the companies would choose maybe 2 or 3 companies, but those first few years we had them all exclusively.
Oh, wow.
And we were at the top of the list of the others. We have a fabulous relocation department, and it's been built on service, and in fact our company right from the very beginning was built on service to the client, service to the industry itself. I have no idea how many hours and years were put in with helping establish the efficiency of our industry itself. And then the third leg of the stool is service to the communities in which we are. And we are really doing a good job with that.
Well, on that note, of course, as long as I've ever known of Uncle Maurice, he always had a deep-seated, he always had such a strong philanthropic side and a desire to give back to the community. Was he that way when you met him? Was that a trait that developed in his later years? Was he always like that?
And I think Maurice Acres has always been like that, in helping people. People who have been fortunate enough to sit next to him on his many flights between Austin and Dallas in those 7 years. They said that they really got inspired. They got a MBA education. And he was all, and he hated the personal pronoun I. And that tells you something about him right there.
Right.
He was always thinking of the other person and giving them encouragement and advice. and even the stewardesses who would tell him their love affair, their broken hearts, and he'd straighten things out for them like that. And even on his last visit to the hospital when he died, he was arranging scholarships for some of those nurses and some of those people.
Oh, wow.
He could do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he came right in, and in no time he was helped revive the Harvard Club when he got here with some younger Harvard grads.
Mm-hmm.
He became chairman of the Crime Commission. He revived that. Everything he did, it was better, made it better. Mm-hmm. And he became the official introducer and prayer giver and everything of the Rotary Club. Kind of took that over. And he became chairman of the Dallas County Community College Foundation.
Oh, wow.
And he became chairman of the St. Paul Hospital Foundation.
Gosh.
You know, he was a leader.
Mm-hmm. Well, of the many, many things that he and you together were involved with to that end, what do you think had the biggest impact on just the city of Dallas? What was the thing that he focused, or the two of you focused on, that maybe had the greatest impact just on the city?
I think that Maurice Acers established or intensified integrity in every organization he touched, every group he touched. You know, Mr. Hoover had some detractors, especially in the Kennedy years and all, but discipline was his second name. And of course, Maurice had been disciplined all his life. His mother was a disciplinarian. But the ethics award in the Rotary here is named for Maurice Acers.
Oh, wow.
That gives you the idea.
Sure. Wow. Well, one of the particular things that's coming to mind of all your philanthropic endeavors, the Keep Texas Beautiful campaign?
Yes, he was president of that, and he and O.P. Schnabel in San Antonio really kind of founded it. O.P. founded the Beautified San Antonio, and then it became the Beautified Texas. And Maurice got the governor's office and the Highway Commission involved in Keep Texas Beautiful. And it was a part of the Don't Mess with Texas. And he was a real leader in Keep Texas Beautiful.
Well, back to his business life. Again, as long as I've ever known him, he was always the mentor, the person that people looked up to for guidance in their business lives. Who were Maurice's mentors and people that he looked up to when he was developing his business skills, and who were people that he really admired? And
he had a college professor law professor that he admired, and that was Keaton. And Reverend E.C. Rowan, who was the minister of our Christian church here for 25 years, was very close to Maurice, and they had high-level conversations about life in general. He was a great admirer of Mr. Hoover, really, and
maybe some of his contemporaries, like Alan Shivers, was a very close business.
Of course, he loved Alan Shivers, respected him so much. And you know, Maurice was just larger than life, and maybe why I am not coming up with mentors for him, because as long as I've known him, he has been the mentor.
Right.
And no one could surpass him.
Well, you know, one more thing I want to touch on again, too, that you've already spoke of a little bit, was his relationship with my grandfather, with Bob Pipes.
Oh, he loved Bob Pipes.
Are there any, you mentioned the drive to the Chicago World's Fair and things like that. Were there any other special memories that you recall that the two of them had? Was it just hunting and fishing trips? And
well, I remember one early trip when I think Luella was pregnant with Sid. We went to down at his invitation for a dove hunt, and it was quite an experience. We were in the back of the truck, and quite an experience for me at the time, because there were just doves everywhere, and those special ones, what do you call them?
The white wing?
The white wing. And Bob had everything. He was so such a good organizer, and so was Maurice. But Bob had orange juice in the motel room for all of us, and breakfast and coffee, and he had everything. Had been fishing, and but it was every time we would visit Bob, it was an experience, and you could just see the love and the joy, pure joy, those two men had for each other.
Well,
and of course he loved all of you boys too.
Oh yeah, we had some great memories. Well, you mentioned today would have been his 99th birthday.
Yes.
Were there any special birthday memories or times that you were together on his birthday that were in particular?
He made every occasion a wonderful occasion, exciting and surprising, white flowers came on every one of my birthdays. I don't think that I don't think in all of my lifetime I have never met anyone whose opinion I valued more and never questioned.
Mm-hmm.
And that is saying quite a lot for a female who has made her own way since age 14, really.
Mm-hmm.
And never knew my father, and had a very difficult stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
Who did some good things. He was quite an athlete himself.
Mm-hmm.
So my older brother had polio when he was a child,
Mm-hmm.
and his right side was never really developed.
Mm-hmm.
But the stepfather developed it.
Mm-hmm.
Our grandfather started in the hills of Arkansas. Our grandfather, Reverend Mabry, was a circuit riding preacher in the hills of Arkansas, and he would take my brother, Raymond, to Hot Springs, Heber Springs, anywhere there was a spring that would give him an opportunity to give him therapy in,
wow.
in the springs.
Mm. That's nice. This is a little bit random, but it seems like I remember there was something that Maurice used to say, I think to you and maybe even to Betty, when something you had done it was a sweet, wonderful thing. Is that?
Oh, sweet, smart thing.
Sweet, smart thing.
Yeah.
That's
when we would have lots of memory for a name or a place, and whoever would come up with it got a sweet, smart thing.
I remember
And
that.